Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion. It's going to be more of a speaker highlight, but this is hosted by the Black Professionals Network. I am Saray Mapp. I currently serve as one of the program planning and development co-chairs with Kiara here, who will also introduce herself.
Hey team, my name is Kiara Venegas. I use they, she pronouns. I'm also one of the other planning and development co-chairs for BPN. Thank you so much for joining us today. Today's conversation will cover the nuances of being Black and having to navigate disabilities in a professional housing workspace. I will also be moderating this session and introduce our esteemed panelist. After I say your name, please share your role and how many years you've been in housing and briefly how you ended up working within housing or how you've moved to a different sector of higher ed. So without further ado, would you mind introducing yourself and your role?
Yes, wonderful. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Masana Golden. I currently serve as the Assistant Director for Residence Life at Kennesaw State University, so in Georgia. I am originally from Southern Illinois, so did undergrad at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, go Cougars, where I became an RA and then loved the profession. Shifted to grad school where I went to Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, go Salukis. I was exploring the system before then moving to Georgia, where I started my professional career at Spelman College, and then now here at Kennesaw State. So it's been a while. I've been serving in the housing world, started off as an RA in 2010. Jesus. And have been going ever since.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So the intersectionality of being Black with disabilities and working in a space that pushes physical, emotional, mental boundaries can be very taxing. Navigating all of this can take a toll. So we're here to kind of shed some light on the challenges and hurdles that folks face. So I will also be like copying and pasting this into the chat. So in case other people are like, what are we talking about? How have your experiences as a Black housing staff member with disabilities shaped your perspective on accessibility and inclusion within campus housing?
Yeah. So for me, I think it's important to begin any conversation about disability, living with disability, with understanding that there's a lot of nuances to living with a disability, right? So I will be transparent, and I think it's probably good for y'all to know. So I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, which is a neurodegenerative disease that affects your central nervous system, so your brain, your spine, your body, in 2014. So it'll be 10 years this September since I have been diagnosed. I do recognize that that situation is a little different than someone who maybe was born with a disability. And so just wanting to kind of acknowledge that, right? Because I've lived a good part of my life, so 24 years of my life, not living as a disabled person, right? And so then for the almost last 10 years of my life, I have been living and leading and managing that. So to answer then your question, definitely it has been eye-opening for me, again, because I recognized that it was something that significantly changed my life when it hadn't always been that way. I was already working in housing. I was actually in grad school when I got diagnosed with MS. I also recognize that I have an invisible illness. So it is not one that is readily aware to people until I tell them or until they see me having a low spoons day. Um, I do remember when I shifted into my first professional job as a hall director or resident director, same difference. And I thought about that, like as having, like I said, a degenerative disease where I am healthy-ish. Like I can walk, I can function in the ways that we think people typically could. And so one of the things that I thought about was, ooh, am I gonna be able to be on call if this whole MS thing takes a turn for the worse? Like what happens if I am unable to walk, or if I am unable to move about how I normally do, right? So eye-opening for me, and then thus eye-opening for the students that I serve, right? So just thinking about things like when I'm moving in a space, I'm looking at, okay, how accessible is this space for folks who don't move around like everyone else moves? And so, yeah. And so also giving me things to think about.
Thank you so much for disclosing that and like letting us know and get to like share a piece of your life with us.
Yeah.
In what ways do you believe that educational institutions can better support and accommodate staff members with disabilities within their roles in the housing department?
Yeah. So I believe, and as I was preparing for our opportunity to speak with each other, just thinking about environments in which people feel free to share. So I was reading an article, and I'll post it for y'all because I have some resources. But it's from Inside Higher Ed, and what it's called is Why Higher Ed Needs Leaders with Disabilities. Um, and part of it that it talks about is it's not that there are no leaders who have disabilities, um, but it is that sometimes people choose not to share that disability with others because of what that might mean for how they're perceived in a role and whatnot. And so for me, I made it a point in my career where at first, when I was first diagnosed, so I was diagnosed in 2015, started my first job in 2015, and I went in and I was like, I'm not going to tell them I'm not going to tell them about my MS. I'm not going to say anything. I went back and forth when I was finishing up grad school because it was a significant event that happened in my life where I remember being a graduate assistant. And I actually held two assistantships, like two quarter-time assistantships. So I was a live-in assistant director, and then I also had the opportunity to serve as our housing social media graduate assistant. And so when I got diagnosed, I was like, ooh, what are we going to do with this? And I wanted to quit. I had some wonderful people. Shout out to Dr. Donahue, to Tina Horvath, who were instrumental in helping me navigate that space, right? They could have just been like, okay, girl, yeah, you can quit. Go do you. Best wishes, prayers, and hopes, thoughts, and prayers, right? And not to poke fun or what have you, but I do think that sometimes it's challenging, right? It's challenging for people to know, like, how do I support someone who has a disability if I don't sit in that space? A lot of times I'll say, you don't get it unless you've got it. But that is why it's so important to, number one, to be open and honest as much as you can about the things that we have going on as it relates to living and working with a disability. But then also on the other side of that, if you don't have a disability, welcoming and making sure that people feel good about sharing something that is, number one, a lot of times nothing you can do about it. And number two is like we still have a life to live even as we are. So thinking about that, I know I'm talking a lot, but thinking about that from the from the professional side, but then also thinking about the student perspective, right? So how important, and we talk about people of color, how important is it for young Black women to see me in my fullness with locks, showing up as an assistant director, right? Moving and grooving and all this excellence, uh, right? So just in the same way that they need to see that, then it's like, how much more beneficial would it be for our students who go and see SDS every day, who need ESAs on campus, who struggle with, using assistive devices, to know that they are not alone uh, in that? And for me, that was probably some of the most special times. Like I think about my residents um, at Spelman and how some of them, like I formed good relationships with other students who had disabilities who disclosed to me, and we checked on each other. Like she's like, Miss Mo, That's what they call me. They're like, Miss Mo, have you been taking your medicine? Are you taking good care of yourself? How many spoons do you have? um, and and I think that is so beautiful, right? And to show people that yes, if Masana can do it, so can you. Like, right? In spite of what you have going on, in spite of your abilities, there is opportunity for you to thrive when it comes to working in housing. Challenging sometimes, but definitely possible.
Absolutely. And I know that you've touched on spoons a couple of times. I'm just, if you feel comfortable sharing, would you mind sharing with the group, unless they don't know, if they don't know what spoons are, what you mean when you say
Yeah,
that?
yeah. So I'm also gonna drop something else in the chat for y'all. So the spoon theory is one that was created by a woman who had lupus. Now I might mess up her name, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry if I do. But do do do. So basically, she was Christine Miserandino. Miserandino, I think that's how you say her name, Christine Miserandino. So she was explaining to her friend one time when they were out what it was like for her to live with lupus. Um, because remember, I said you don't get it unless you got it, kind of thing. But so the spoon theory was, let's say that everyone starts out their day with 10 spoons. Okay. And so then I want you to think about your day. So what was that like? Did you so you got up, did you brush your teeth? Did you take a shower? Did you eat? Did you put your clothes on? So mind you, that's even before we get ready to walk out of the door, but that could be definitely like 5 spoons that are gone. The spoons are going to um really be indicative of our energy levels, right? So I tell people all the time, I look at my energy like most people look at their money. So it's like you spend it, you spend it and you spend it and you spend it. And then what happens when you don't have any more and you're at a deficit? And so, yeah, so the spoon theory is a way to communicate with people who don't live in bodies like mine to be able to understand what that might feel like. And I remember I've done it with my staffs before. And I gave them, we did it with straws. You could do it with whatever you have that you can do multiples of. And I walked them through. I said, now walk me through your day. And as they were talking, I was taking. And I was taking them. I was like, oh, okay, great. You ate lunch. Wonderful. Let me have that spoon. Or, oh, okay, you did this. You went to class. Okay, great. Let me get 2 of those spoons. Um, and it was funny to me, their reaction. They were like, no, oh my gosh, you're taking my songs. I need that. And I'm like, I know, welcome to my world. Welcome to my world. Yeah. Hope that helps.
No, absolutely. Thank you so much. It was concise and beautiful. I loved it. Thank you. A little like we're gonna take a step back for a hot second. Our other
Yeah.
panelist was able to join us today. Yay, how exciting. If you could take a moment out of your time, and if you could say your name, pronouns if you feel comfortable doing so, and briefly explain your role, how many years you've been in housing, and what sector in higher ed you're in right now.
Sure. Are you able to hear me? Because my computer, the webcam is not working. So like I would love to show you how I look like, but it's just not working. But I'm Tamara or Tamara, but either or is preferred. I go by the she series pronouns. I currently work as a residential life coordinator. I'm in my 2nd year. Loving it and hating it sometimes, but each his own. But I've been in res life for like 3 years and a half. I don't know what's the other question. I feel like there was one more question in your thing that I did not answer.
I believe you answered it all beautifully. With that being said, so if you would like to answer this, whoever wants to answer it first, please go ahead. But could you share some of the unique challenges you faced as an individual who navigates both racial identity and disability within the higher education sphere and in housing?
I guess I'll go. I think one challenge that I currently face, being that I'm in Massachusetts, is that most of the institutions here are not accessible. I'm gonna say at all. There are a true few that are, but most of them is like everything has stairs. Everything has like you have to go through a maze to find an elevator. I have a physical disability, so like being somebody that's on call, being somebody that has to respond to students in crises sometimes makes it a little difficult when most of the residential halls here are not able or not built for me to go in. So I have to find like other ways to figure out how to talk to the student, find other ways for them to get the resources that they need, knowing I can't be there to support them. And it can be a little difficult because some students just don't want to talk to you. And if I'm outside and you're inside, and I can't go inside, it's more of like, okay, I don't want to call the other resources I have because I know that's gonna affect you more. So sometimes it's just like trying to like figuring out language, figuring out this or that. So I think the biggest challenge for me is just being on call and being in a buildings that are not built for you, but then people always say, this is an accessible institution, and you're like, is it really? Because I'm big on like I'm big on like terms have to be what they are. And when people just say accessible, I'm like, but is it? Like, but that's like my side of things that I just find challenging, but it sometimes makes my work a little fun because I do like figuring out challenges. It just feels like extra work that is placed on me. But that's my side. I'm gonna let the other host answer the question.
Yeah. Um, so some of the unique challenges of being like the both and, right, is not only am I a Black woman, which has all kinds of uh interesting pieces and aspects of just being, but also someone with an invisible disability. And so really sometimes that feels like pressure. It feels like, don't embarrass your folks, Masana. But then don't also embarrass the folks like you're in the disabled community, right? Like, because then it does, it feels like pressure that like, I can't have an off day, right? And I do have them, and I've grown to the part and the point now that it is what it is. I know when I need to take time for myself. I know when I need support. I know when I need to communicate, but that wasn't something that I've always had. And so it did at one point feel like, oh no, you can't show people that you really don't feel well because then they're going to think that you can't do your job. And then you're not safe here anymore. Um, and so just thinking about those kind of things is definitely at the forefront of my mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you both for sharing. I really appreciate your insight on this. How do you envision leveraging your experience and insights to advocate for broader changes and improvements in the representation and support of African American individuals with disabilities across higher ed?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start. Um, I think that something that as brown skinned folks we can relate to is that sometimes if you are in spaces where there are not many of us, then we are looked at to speak on behalf of all of us. And we know that that is not fair and it's not reasonable. I'm like, I can't speak to the lived experience of every Black woman ever. um, and then the same thing kind of like on the disability side, like, right? Like, so again, making sure that people understand this is how disability affects me, right? I can speak to my nuances. I can also speak to some things of like, yeah, this might make a little sense, or this is something that might be a commonality that we share. But so sharing my perspective then is leveraging that, right? So when it makes sense, it may not always make sense for me to be the one sitting at the table to talk about disability and access and inclusion and diversity, like all of those pieces. It may not be Masana, but sometimes I do think that it's wise to have folks at the table when you can, because then they may shed light on, okay, yeah, we're talking about building a brand new building. Is this accessible? And what does that mean? Because accessible to me might look different than accessible to someone else. And yeah, and then also in that same vein, allowing people to get to know me and not hiding my disability, I think makes advocates in other folks who care about me, right? So I'll use my work best friend as an example. I remember at one point when I first got my handicap placard some years ago, I was scared to use it at my job because I was like, oh, people are gonna know that it's my car and they're gonna know that I park in the blue spots and they are going to judge me for it. And because I have an invisible disability, people may say, well, you don't need to park there or there's nothing wrong with you. And I've had someone tell me that in a work setting where it's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. And I'm like, well, first of all, thank you. You can't tell, right? Because if I never shared, I would probably live and move and groove and never let anyone know. But it is important for me to share because then what my work best friend does. So now, not only am I an advocate for folks who park in the blue spots, but my friends become advocates for me and say things like, oh, you don't feel good? Oh yeah, we're going to park right here. And I wish someone would say something to you when you hop out the car. And so I do think that I think about people that I know and that I've shared my disability with who are like, oh, you have the thing that's on that one commercial. And I'm like, yeah, the one, the 2-a-day one. Yes, yes, I am familiar with the medicine. But while it is joyful and like, and I can joke and humor is how I navigate, right? Like, but I think it's a very real thing. It's a very real aspect of as we share and build community and invite others to join us in our community, in a community that really is not talked about very often, especially as professionals. Then again, we make advocates of the folks who care about us and who are potentially in rooms and spaces and at tables that we're not. And then they can then say, oh, yeah, have we thought about this? Because I was just talking to Masana and she shared some information that she had, or she was talking to a student and like, you know, really utilizing the stories of the people who are around you, not to make them feel bad or not to be like, woe is me, but to really uplift an entire community of people who are very oftentimes overlooked.
Thank you. Yeah, some people just need to add 5 and 5 together and go tend to their own business. You know what I mean? Tamara, would you mind also answering the question as well?
Sure. I think for me, I think being a person of color and also somebody that has like a visible like disability, I think sometimes the word professionalism is is a word that gets tossed just as like, oh, be professional. And I'm like, with all the disabilities I do currently hold that you do not see, I'm being me within the comfortable space of me being me. So like there's some days that I'm just like, I I hear people say like, oh, you should just like dress better or look better or what other nonsense that comes out of their mouths. And I'm just like, but you're not seeing what I have to deal with the moment I have to get up and come to my job. um, and there's just moments that I'm just like, or like I'm the voice of people with in wheelchairs because my institution's majority, most of all the my colleagues are white. And so sometimes I feel like they just put us all in this like bubble that's like, oh, we're all good. We all do the same things every day. And I'm just like, No, we don't. I have different challenges. You have different challenges. I feel like I'm not answering your question. I'm sorry. It just I'm like um, but I do think that like for me, the best way I try to like advocate is to just be authentically me in ways that might not impress my boss. But it's more days like there's some days like I just wear what I wear because that's how I feel comfortable. Like there's some days I just can't do like my spoons aren't at a 10 for me to do what they assume I should be like on a day to day. Some days I'm at a 3 and I just be at a 3. And I think I kind of let represent that to my residents also is like you don't have to change yourself to impress others. Like your job is your job. And I feel like I'm not answering your question, so I'm gonna stop. I'm so sorry because like I now like feel like I'm just like I'm just like I love my job, but no, never mind. I'm gonna stop. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. We love to hear about it, promise you.
Um, so yeah, I just feel like there's just days that I'm okay being the person that's like loud and proud, because I feel like there's just other days that other people don't aren't always the cheerleaders. So I'm okay being that like person to be like, try me. Just try me. Cause I'm doing my best. And if that's not fulfilling to you, it's fulfilling to the students that see me doing the job that I do. Um, so I think that is more me because it's just more of like I can't change me for you, but I will do me for me. Uh, and just try to talk to people and try to see or try to make them see how crazy higher education is when it comes to accessibility. I don't know where I went with this, but yes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, 100%. And we appreciate your authenticity in this space as well, too. Yeah. Um, to Tamara, I know that you weren't able to come for the first two questions. Would you be okay if we kind of like circled back to those?
Sure.
Wonderful. So how have your experiences as a Black housing staff member with disabilities shaped your perspective on accessibility and inclusion within campus housing?
Sure. I think for me, being somebody of color and somebody with a disability, you kind of just get to see that the space was just never meant for uh for most institutions. It was just never meant for somebody of color or somebody with a disability. Because like for me, like I get up in the morning and you just see all the like buildings and programs and all the things that are meant to be for everyone on campus. And then you're like, yes, but it was in this building. It was in that building. It was, there's not like an interpreter or blah, 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 blah. And then you just look at like, we always say that Res Life is like a second home for students, but then when you look at it, you're like, but is it though? Like we don't really change much about the buildings once they're here and they're kind of what they are until like they're living fossils. They're just going to be there forever. Uh, and it's like, okay, but what are the changes we're gonna make? And then when you do bring up those changes, the first thing that they come up with is, oh, it costs this much this amount of money. And you're like, but why is that the first thing you tell me? Like you could have told me a bunch of other things, but the first excuse you have to tell me is we can't do it because it costs this much. And I'm like, but money shouldn't be the reason you don't do something. It could be the infrastructure, it could be this, that. But if the first thing you tell me is, oh, it costs $5,000 okay, and it, I, I get that it costs money. Everything costs money. But then that's always like the stopping block, and you're like, okay, I don't get where you're going with this. So it kind of annoys me when being a person of color, you're trying to like advocate for like other things, but then when it comes to accessibilities, everything that you try to make it as inclusive always comes with money, and then money stops everything. Um, and you're like, I don't know where to go with this. If every time I do bring something up, money's the issue and not the solution. Like, then give me a solution that doesn't have money. Like, I don't get it. Like, everything has money, so it can't tell me that's the reason. So that's like one of the main issues, because I'm very big on like my current campus about like accessible doors. Not all our buildings do. It makes no sense. But then we have students that are in wheelchairs or have other accessibility needs. And they complain, and then I have to be the advocate to be like, I'm the res life person. And then they're like, oh, but it costs so much. And you're like, yeah, but they're only asking for a button. No, it's fine. For a button. So yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's it.
No, absolutely. And it's like, oh, I'm coming to you with a solution too, but you're telling me that it's still just money, it's very frustrating. And as Saray said before, if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We'll get to them after this next question. For tomorrow again, so in what ways do you believe that educational institutions can better support and accommodate their staff members with disabilities in their roles within housing?
I think one way is I think it's just being being willing to be as like in res life, we are the people that are so like accommodating. We try to go through hoops when it comes to all our students on campus, like with any disability, any learning outcomes, like we are their people. But then on the flip side, I think when we think of our ups, sometimes they're not as flexible. They're like, but this is your job. You signed up for it. And you're like, or maybe for me, sometimes I'm like, yeah, I can do my job, but I have no worry about doing my job. It's just A, B, and C could be slightly different. But then they're like, but that's not your job. And I'm like, but I'm not changing my job. I'm also like offering you like, so like maybe like like for me, I've been the type of person to be like, okay, maybe I'm on call in the mornings. So like if there's somebody in a building that I can go into, there's other RLCs I can tap into instead of me being on call at night. At night, no one wants to be a burden and call somebody to be like, hello, I can't get into fine. And so like I feel like maybe I'm the person that just takes all the mornings. I'm willing to be that accommodating, but they always look at it and be like, but then that's not fair. But I'm like, but then you hired me. And I understand that sometimes things can't be moved. I just feel like sometimes people just need to be more open when it comes to being somebody of color, and also or for me being somebody of color in a wheelchair, because it's like sometimes everybody like looks is like above me, so I always feel like they look at me to be like a student because like I'm short in a chair. um, so I feel like they never take me as seriously because it's like, oh, she's just Tamara. And I'm like, yeah, but if I was standing, I would be your height. So I don't see the issue here. And I think that's just being me, that like being somebody that's in a wheelchair. I just feel like some people just look at me differently because like I'm naturally going to be looked down on, not on purpose, but like physically looked down to when they're talking to. And sometimes I'm just like, oh, don't do that. We could sit down in chairs and be face to face when you're talking to me. Because I don't want to look up, you don't want to look down. We could be eye level. So I think it's just being more willing to understand that like some actions can be changed when it comes to supporting people within res life, especially because we're so accommodating that like sometimes we kind of want that back when it comes to people supporting us with how we do our job. Also another rant. I'm sorry.
Never be sorry. It's not a rant. We're asking the questions, right?
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that perspective for us.
Awesome. I was looking at the chat and I didn't see any other questions. If anyone feels comfortable, you can hop on the mic and ask questions as well. And we'll let that sit for about 2-3 minutes so we don't have to sit here and awkwardly just stare at each other. So we'll wait a second for anyone that has questions.
Yeah. So I actually didn't have a question, but as Tamara was speaking about um, some of her like frustrations, right? I was like, about the budget, right? Because the assistant director in me is like, how much is that gonna cost? How much are the things gonna cost? But I think it's again going back to the point of this is why you need people with disabilities in leadership spaces so that we can say, okay, and then does our budget allow for us to earmark a little bit of money for maybe some like accommodation just in cases? So then it doesn't feel like such a a financial risk or burden when people are asking for these things, right? Also knowing what's available to you, how do you find, like if we're talking about like accommodations and things, right? So Jan is one of the places that and supervisors can get on and Google, let Google be your friend if we are unsure. Even as I was looking for accommodations when I was like, I'm struggling, I need assistance. And so I was like, okay, well, let me see what might be available for me in order for me to do my job to the best of my ability. But a lot of times that is advocating for ourselves and praying that you have leaders and supervisors in places that are willing to hear you out, um, even if they don't fully understand.
Thank you for that. Listen, as a supervisor, I think I'm gonna pose a question. This is just from me to y'all. How would you, I guess, recommend as a supervisor who doesn't necessarily have differing abilities to advocate appropriately for their staff when they can't um, divulge that staff member's information because the staff member's not comfortable sharing it, but they need something?
So for me, I would say have a very intentional, but not weird. Don't make it weird conversation, right? Because some people are like, oh, disability is scary. Um, but having a conversation with them to number one, get to know the person, and see kind of how comfortable they are with their current like situation, their medical situation. Um, and then instead of because we don't want to share not having side meetings about what's going on with Masana, but maybe like I said, let Google be your friend. Like, how do I support someone who has a disability? Like, right, like what if I said, because I'm sure you're not the only one, right? There are a ton. When I say a ton, as like I was saying, I was doing research on this and it was like 1 in 5 students have a disability, and a lot of adults have like disabilities, but a lot of times people don't know because they don't share. And then really looking up what kind of resources exist at your institution. So maybe that is a conversation with an HR partner to say, hey, like, what would we do, or what support do we offer for folks if they do need accommodations or if they're struggling, and really kind of doing some of that back end work if you can, if your scheduling your time like permits. But I think that just goes a long way, in letting the person know that they're not in it by themselves, because a lot of times it can be very lonely to walk around in a world that does not think about or see disability as, um, not necessarily as important, but in the same way that we see diversity when it comes to race, sex, like those kind of things, right?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions from the floor? If you want to drop them in the chat, message them to us directly before we drop some wrap up information in here. Well, AT already beat me to that, so I'll say it. You know, that kind of vibe. We'll wait one more second. All right, well, we thank everyone for hopping on today. We're going to give some of our BPN chairs a quick second to introduce themselves, and then we'll go through some quick announcements and we'll wrap it up. So if you are on the BPN exec board, if you just want to hop on, introduce yourself, you can turn the camera on, not leave it on, doesn't matter, whatever floats. But like I said before, hi y'all, I'm Saray Mapp. I currently serve as the Associate Director of Residence Life and Housing at Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College in South Georgia, but I'm one of the program planning and development chairs. Y'all, it's a long name. It gets me every time for BPN.
And I'm Kiara Venegas. I use she, they pronouns. I work as a hall director at the University of Michigan. I'm the other co-planning and development co-chair.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Amber Stoltz, and I am the chair of the Black Professionals Network. I want to first and foremost thank our speakers and guests today for this topic. This topic from our board was super, super important to us, that we give folks that are underrepresented, that identify as having a disability. We also want to acknowledge that there may be some folks that have a disability, but they don't feel comfortable sharing it. They may identify differently. So we want to also be respectful and inclusive of those folks and the varying identities within this space and topic. And I will kick it off to my chair-elect, AT.
I believe AT is doing is in the middle of a fire alarm at the moment.
Gotcha. So the next BPN board member can go. We understand a good old red light. Looks like I see Jafon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jafon Stubbs. I am the member at large chair for the Black Professionals Network, and I am currently a residence hall director at the University of Connecticut with AT. But he's in a different area, so I don't hear his fire alarm, thankfully.
And good afternoon. My name is Joshua McFadder. I serve as the Marketing Communications Chair for BPN, but full-time as the Associate Director for Residential Living at Temple University. And I see Kayla.
Hey y'all, my name is Kayla Harris, pronoun she, her, and hers. I am currently a Community Director at SIUE, Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. I am one of the outreach chairs for this lovely group. My co-chair isn't here, but his name is Emmanuel, and he's the Associate Director of Residence Life over at Langston, I believe.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Much like Amber said, thank you to our panelists today. I just dropped in the chat, our next roundtable will be in May, and it's about parent and family commitments as a professional. AT dropped above that a bunch of links, so check some of those out. Connect with us if you're not connected. Check out the responses if you want to connect to other professionals. Register for our upcoming roundtables. Get familiar with us, because we're going to get familiar with you. That's the best way to put it. So we hope to see you all on our roundtable in May as well. And then, of course, in June, we have Campus Home Live. So if you're going to be present, we hope to see you there. We'll have some amazing things going on, and we'll let you know more about that as things progress. But once again, thank you so much to everyone for showing up today. We hope that you got some tidbits of information, because I know I did. Thank you once again to our panelists, and everyone, have a great day.